Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching.
So there's a lot of inspiration around us, everything from the Olympics to social justice movements to our day-to-day lives amidst challenge. We can find inspiration from those larger scale things that may be engaging people wholly, and we can also find inspiration from things that show up in our day-to-day. And so L Shawn and I were talking about this just before our recording, how we both have encountered inspirational things over the past few weeks that we'd like to explore and see where they go. And so for me, there are two things that really stands out, and that is just the concept of AI and how we can use AI as a way to bring humanity together rather than apart, as a way to provide thinking around new economic systems and new ways of doing and being. I really feel like this is pushing us into change, and we want people with voices that are centered on the human experience and humanity at the forefront of these discussions. And so that's where I get inspired when they are included in that way. And then one other thing that inspired me in the Olympics, an announcer said something to the effect of, it's okay to go to the darkness. Like if, let's say you completely fall on one of the ski jumps or whatever, like you feel really sad about it. But you don't have to stay in the darkness because people are around you to help you move through that and move away from that in certain ways. And I love the way that he framed it. And I'm not saying exactly how he said it because he did a much better job with it. But just this concept of you don't have to do it alone, right? When you are in the really bad places. And also, we do sometimes have to get to those dark places for that inspiration and growth to shape us. So those are really the three kind of main topics when it comes to inspiration that have been on my mind lately. And I know, L Shawn, you've been doing things in the community as well. So I'll turn it over to you to share a little bit more about what's been inspiring you.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing those two things that are inspiring you. I also am interested and curious about what AI can bring. I know that's something that, we talk about in terms of the programs that we offer for youth, for middle school and high schoolers, and just how there's definitely, this is very similar to moving from horse and carriage to cars. There's a very different way of moving, it makes things more accessible to us. And there's also the fear of what that also brings in terms of what AI is capable of and what could happen. There are some people who believe that AI could be like the Terminator movies where AI takes over, but there's just so much there, so much possibility there. And as far as what you said about the Olympics too, just about relying on your support network and giving yourself that permission to ask for help when you need it and to make that part of the process. And it's not like something that is a weakness or something that should be, that someone should be embarrassed about. So I liked that as well, because when you are in a dark place, it often requires help from others, people to help you see, the light, and to sit with you in the darkness and give you that extra support and encouragement to seek out the light when you're in the dark. So two very great things to be thinking about in terms of like inspiration. And as you said, Eryn, I am out in the community, and one thing that I did last Friday was I went to a lecture at a church in Boulder, and it was Dr. Chenoweth, and she is a political scientist, and she's also a sociologist, and she studies broad-based community-led organization. And she was talking about civil resistance and civil disobedience is part of civil resistance. And she just had this great lecture about, what that takes. And of course, it was in the context of what's happening in Minnesota with Minneapolis and St. Paul, and the just the political climate that we're in now, and how could civil resistance play a part in resisting the current administration. And one thing, like with these types of topics, one thing that I often lean towards, and that's maybe this is because of me just going for the path of least resistance in my own personal experience, is looking at the new way, like looking at a new way, looking at an alternative, forging a path, not working with the system, but working on something new, something different. And that could also be something that AI could be used for as well. AI looks at information, can see different pieces of information faster and broader than we can as humans. And so I think using AI as a tool to, analyze but not interpret the information, maybe put it into a form that's easily digestible, or a form that's kind of maybe easier to analyze, as opposed to just like going through many books and articles and all of the knowledge that's out there in the world, but just like using AI as a tool to look at trends or look at key moments in history that are similar to the moments that we're facing right now. I think that could be a way to clarify paths and trends and that kind of thing. So I definitely think AI is a great tool for that. And the idea of like a new way or a new path, that's one of the things that appeals to me, because I personally am like, well, we've seen that this doesn't work. And so how can we come up with a plan or a system that does work, or a system that is more humane, or that really takes into account our humanity. And I think that's really important as well. And not just on a societal level, but on a personal level. That's one of the things that I tend to look at in terms of my own personal growth and my own personal development. What can I do differently? What would it be like to approach this in a different way? And what steps can I take in order to make that a reality? So those are some things that have been on my radar, things that have been inspiring me. Is the idea, first of all, of just the power of community is also part of that too. And one of the things that I think about is, how can we as a community work on a new way? Not just resisting what exists now, but dream and co-construct and co-create a different way of being, and learn from what has come before us, what has been done before. One thing that this group that the Learning Center where I work is a delegate. It's a member of this institution. And this is broad-based organizing. And this is one of the reasons why I have been interested in these types of lectures and this kinds of conversation. One of the things that this group that I'm part of, Coloradoans for a Common Good, which is about community organizing. And one of the things that we are focusing on this year is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And that is an example of building a new way, looking at things differently in a way that is really radical in that time. So, for colonists to see themselves as equal to nations and, countries and leaders, and being like, we are on the same level as you. We have the same rights as you. We have the same expectations. and we can fight and we can go to war. That was at the time, that was radical. That was like a radical thinking. And it is the act of defining defining your values, defining what it means to be human. And that is something that I've been really thinking about a lot in terms of the Declaration of Independence. If we were to write something similar to the Declaration of Independence today, what would that look like? What would our grievances be? Because the Declaration of Independence is largely, a list of grievances. And it also defines government. What is a just government? What is a just king? And this is a tyrant. So they have to define tyrant and give their reasons for basically separating from Britain and the kingdom and making their own state, their own country, basically. And so that was radical and new. And that was a very bold and courageous act on the part of the colonists. And it was not just the people who wrote the Declaration, because there was so much in that. And so I'm inspired by community. I'm inspired by the power of community and what systematic, organized organization can do for affecting change. So those are some things that are on my mind. Eryn, anything come to mind while I was
getting a little bit excited about coaching again, because I think coaching delivers what you're talking about, the way for people to create. One time I came across this quote around like, critique less, create more. And that has stuck with me for the past however many years. It's been a long time ago, because we are a society that loves to critique, whether based on fact or feeling or whatever it might be. But we can hold that aside and use this as a time to create. And that's where coaching steps into such a beautiful space, because coaching helps people with their mindset to get in a place to be creators, right? But it also helps people see their interconnectedness. And so I really am excited about what coaching can do and grow as coaching comes alongside all these changes that are moving, right? We are in a very fast paced change society at this point. There's going to be a lot of change. And I think that goes back at the individual level to mindset. And that's one of the hardest pieces of work we're all going to have to do, because a lot of people don't like change, and a lot of people struggle with change due to trauma or difficulty imagining what could be, hanging on to something they want so badly, not knowing that there could be something better to move forward. And I think that when coaches work with mindset with their clients, there is this ability to help them tap into that creative space and see themselves as confident people who can manifest what they want and need. It's really interesting to me, this mindset concept, because it's not about, like, when we think of traditional mindset, like Carol Dweck's work, or failure as a way to growth. It's not necessarily that. I think it's really tapping into fears and then values, as you mentioned. Like, what are people truly afraid of with certain levels of change? And some people are afraid of some very valid things with this change, right, that AI could bring that may not be good, or in the wrong hands is not good for people. So it's just a time where I think we're facing a complexity we've never faced before, and a change at the rate that we've never faced before. So we need coaching. We need coaching to support people's mindsets. It would be really cool if we could democratize coaching as a profession too, so that it is covered by insurance, or that is more accessible for everybody, while professional coaches are seen as professionals and also get the, pay that they deserve, right? And so anytime we're growing and changing, we cannot let that human piece fall aside or fall to the wayside. And I think that people tend to see sometimes that is not in line with logic, right? When in fact, they can go together really well. And like you mentioned with the Declaration of Independence, there was a lot of creativity, a lot of human focused work, and a lot of logic in the work as well. And I just love when disciplines can come together to create something, because every time it's something that's better, right? So if it's not just the tech people moving AI forward, it should be, you know, everybody from the priests and nuns to the creators and all these things that are having these conversations. So when you say you're doing this in community, I love that, because that's drawing all of these voices together at a time where society is rapidly changing to do something a little bit different, a little bit better potentially, and to not be afraid of trying something new. Again, going back to that fear concept. And so I started kind of the beginning of this podcast with inspiration, and how now that I'm thinking about it with fear, it's like inspiration and fear, interesting words to play with, because when I am inspired, I can still hold the fear, but move forward regardless. If I'm feeling uninspired or unmotivated, I don't see what's in it for me, for instance, or I don't see what's in it for what's going to be good for, humanity, or I don't see what's in it for all these things, then there's a real lack of motivation coupled with fear. And that's when we get to apathy, and we get people who just, are not interested in engaging these conversations, which, happens to be the case. We are so polarized politically too, that I would love to see more conversations across the aisle where people are not representing interests. They're representing human beings, right? They're representing the voices of their communities. And I think that through the work that you're doing, L Shawn, that makes a lot of sense, that is what's happening in Boulder County and the area. And I've been really inspired by this too, because I've been working a little bit on Boulder seniors aging so low, and how can we, have dignity and care for people when they're at that point in their lives. And so for me, it's been a good thing, because it's gotten me out of the lens that I typically am in, which is as a mother, so looking to the younger generation. And then as a community member, a lot of the people I interact with in my community are more in my age group, right? So it's been nice to have a new lens on things. And I think that's the other piece. This is going to happen intergenerationally, because it's affecting everybody. And, there's a lot of brilliant work that's going on that's trying to figure out, how do we help seniors, age in their homes with dignity, and those types of questions. So really, I'll end with this piece, going back to coaching. Asking effective questions, like we do in coaching, is a way to move these conversations forward. And it's also a way to be inspired, or to feel inspired yourself if you're asking the questions too. So, yes. I don't know.
Yeah, there's so much there. And I love that you bring coaching into it, because I do think that the coaching tools that we have, and also coaching itself, can be a great tool or a great way for us to have the language that we need in order to have those type of conversations that include looking at a situation, assessing a situation, and then also looking at what we want different. What is something different that we want, and why do we want that, and what does that look like? So I think that definitely coaching is a great way to come up with the language that we need and the tools that we can use in coaching to explore our values, to explore what's working and what's not, and to get curious about different ways of doing things, like different ways of being, different ways of interacting. And often it's a good idea to look at what's been done before, and what has worked and what hasn't worked, and even looking at what is being done now and what we don't like, what we find lacking. And often if we find, something lacking, that's one place that we can start in terms of forging a new path or finding a new way. Like going back to the conversation around the Declaration of Independence, one of the things that we have spent a lot of time on, I think, as a people and as a country, is the idea of freedom, freedom to do certain things, or freedom from certain things. But one thing that we haven't really talked about in a while is the idea of equality. And that's also part of the Declaration of Independence. If you think about, the first few lines in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident. And the idea that, to use our language, all humans are created equal, that is something I think, to ponder and to really go back to. I think one of a political philosopher, and Harvard scholar, she teaches at Harvard, and she's a political philosopher, Daniel Allen, and I talked about her before. She wrote this book called Our Declaration, and the reason why she did that is because she was teaching the Declaration of Independence to elite college students in Harvard during the day, and at night she was teaching workers, people who just adults, mature adults who, or just adults who were working, and so they would come for their night school or night class. They would learn about the Declaration of Independence, and they were looking at it very differently than the students. The students were looking at it as like an intellectual exercise, and her adult students were looking at it more as a living, breathing document that represents them. And they were starting to see, is this possibly our document? And so she wrote the book, Our Declaration. And in her interpretation of the Declaration of Independence, she does mention that equality is needed in order for democracy to succeed. We have to have equality and free from dominance. We need to be free from dominance. And those are some things that I think would be a great place to start in terms of a new way. I think that in its context, 250 years ago, in its context, the Declaration of Independence was a radical and enlightened thing. It was a very progressive document in the context. If you look at it in the historical context, but if you look at it from our lens, the lens of contemporary U.S., it's not that progressive, right? Because, well, there's a lot of people who were not included in that conversation. Yeah. Women being one, the slaves being another, the indigenous people being another, and there's so many other people who were not at the table. So why not start that conversation from that point? Who wasn't at the table when the Declaration of Independence was written? And how can we create a more perfect union, to go to our Constitution? And then there's the whole idea of going back to what you were saying about the Olympics and the commentator who said the thing about the darkness. Right now, a lot of people would see where we're at in history, where we're at as a nation, very dark. They might see it as very dark. I, on the other hand, see it as an opportunity for change, an opportunity to have those hard conversations, which, going back to coaching, gives us, the language and the tools and the mindset that we need in order to have those difficult conversations. And Eryn, also to go back to what you said about speaking across the aisle, I think that's very important, to have a conversation with people who may see things differently than we do. Or I think it would be worth having that conversation and having those difficult conversations. Like, what kind of nation do you want? And I think it's worthwhile to talk about what's not working, and then what do you think would work better? And are you willing to experiment? Are you willing to, because that's essentially what the United States is. It's a social experiment. So one of the things I love about the Constitution is that you can amend it, and you can write amendments to the Constitution. So if we were to amend the Constitution, or we were to, start over, completely throw away the old document and maybe learn from the old document and make another one, I know that there is an argument for that, just starting over and writing a Constitution that's more inclusive and that has more voices. And the process of the Constitution making includes more voices and includes more perspectives. Any thoughts, Eryn?
Again, going back to coaching, with how do we include more voices in the coaching context? I think one of the things we do as we not only support our clients, but we challenge them to shift perspectives or see new perspectives. And this is done not only in coaching, it's done in counseling sometimes, or other helping professions, sometimes even in case management and things like that. And it's such a powerful tool when used in that space, because usually a relationship has been established, people feel safe to be pushed. And there is this level of like, how do we extend that then? This coaching, what's going on in a coaching appointment that feels so magical, to other parts of our lives and other parts of the country and other parts of, humanity and those sorts of things. And so I want to just kind of play with this concept too of like, how can we include coaching as a way forward in these conversations? Is it a matter of what we're doing at our church right now, where we're actually teaching specific skills on conflict and we're practicing them so that we know how to listen better and ask questions better of people and meet them where they're at, and also be open-hearted and open-minded, but also informed, right? It's not just to get to a place where we agree. It's actually to be okay with not agreeing in some ways, and moving forward with that. And just doing that, that's been an interesting project, because we are 3/4 of the way through the series, where we've done where there's been a sermon and then a workshop, a sermon, then a workshop, etc. And people are a lot more open to kind of like the fun-ish practice activities than the more real-ish activities, which I think is interesting for us to consider in just how we view conflict in our own church community, but how we view conflict just more generally too. Like, what is our relationship with that, and how do we engage that? Because there's so many times, and in my own life, I'll speak for myself too, where it's like, I'll just agree to go along with things, or I'll get really scared and run away. Like, the whole fight, flight, freeze, fawn thing, that whole thing, it shows up for me in different ways. I guess I also have fought back in other ways, but I also freeze. Like, it's like I'm all of those, just depending on the situation. And so going back to this idea of like, okay, we're trying this in a community of a very small community, maybe 60 people. How do we then continue that practice even in just that community of 60 people, right? Like, how does this continue to grow in an act of like radical justice and things like that churches should be about, right? That's what morality and spirituality, at least, is rooted in my opinion, I guess. So how do we, even in our own community, continue this? So we'll be having those conversations and learning from one another, but it's just been an interesting up close experiment to see, how people engage conflict, and what's helpful for learning tools about that and what's not. So yeah, there's so many layers when we go into these community conversations. I know we've talked about inspiration and mindset, and asking questions, and engaging in lectures and going to events and showing up in places that you want and need to show up in. And so when I think of all of that combined with the thinking work on top of all of that about like, how do we build new systems, or how do we make this process exist in a way that is fast enough to keep pace with what's happening right now in the tech world in societal change. But also, if you rush it, then it's not gonna work. And maybe, so it's like, at some point they came up with a Declaration of Independence. So it's like, okay, this is what we have in this time context. And now it's like, okay, what can we get done within this time context, and what, how much time will that take? And that goes back to coaching too, because with our clients, that's one of the first questions that I often get is like, how long is this process going to take? And it's very unknown. It's like, well, based on what I've seen in the past with my clients, it's about, we first start meeting every few weeks, every week, and then that spreads out, and then eventually there's a phase out. Things like this are not necessarily that clear. So that adds a lot of ambiguity for people, which might feel overwhelming. And it might be hard to know where to engage, at which level, right? Or am I going to engage at the level of helping people with conflict? Am I going to engage at the level of rewriting something? Am I going to engage at the level of this or that? Trying to discern that, I think, can be really hard. And I'd love to see some ideas from people because that's an area I struggle with is prioritization. Like I'll just do all of them or whatever. So how do we prioritize then? I guess that's where I'm headed, I guess. How do we prioritize?
I love how you mentioned what's happening at your church in terms of the sessions and how you're having that conversation and you're doing skill building as well and you have stuff. I think that is one place to start is just having conversations in community settings where people feel safe, they feel supported, and they're able to be open to new things or to new perspectives. I think it's really important to have conversations in various community spaces. And then from there, applying that to your sphere of influence, like talking to your friends or your colleagues and saying, this is something that I'm doing. And would you be open to having this conversation as well? And then it's kind of like a ripple effect. And then one of the things that I think about too is like with social media as well. Using that as a tool to reach a larger audience than you would if it was just in your community. But if you are like bringing it to social media, having a conversation, and of course, having ground rules. This is how we're going to have this conversation. These are the things that we're interested in. And these are the things that, we're not interested in or that we won't accept in terms of like, name calling or having unproductive conversations about the topic, because that happens in social media, especially with anonymity. Um, when anonymity is part of it, people do tend to be less polite and more really brutal and not in a good way. It's just this being mean to be mean. They have those trolls out there and then you just don't feed them, that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, I think one thing I think that we could learn from moments in history where these type of things were taking place. If we go back to the discussion of the Declaration of Independence, that just didn't poof appear.
Yeah.
That was a result of conversations among the colonies, people talking about what they were experiencing and how that was similar to what other people were experiencing. That was how they got their list of grievances. That was from all 13 colonies. And there were delegates and there were, assemblies, and it was a process. So I think, as with the Declaration of Independence, it was the result of many conversations. And I think that's where we should start. We should start with the conversation, because I think it's really easy for us to get into our echo chambers, especially in social media. Going back to social media, it's easy to get to those echo chambers of people saying the same thing and not really wanting to venture out and see what it's like for the people who are having different conversations. And I think that takes a lot of guidance and patience to step out of your echo chamber and be like, I wonder what they're saying. And can we have a conversation where it's not you against me or us against them, but it's more, we're in this together. Let's figure out what's going on. And there's where coaching, I think, comes in, where there can be some guidance in this conversation, how to have these difficult conversations, how to do perspective shifts, a perspective taking, that kind of thing. And having guided conversations, facilitated conversations in a neutral, safe environment where there's not going to be high stakes or consequences like social ostracism, that kind of thing. I think a lot of people are afraid to speak against the narrative or even question the narrative. Say what you want to say without having to worry about getting ostracized, judged. More than anything, I think people struggle with questioning or talking about it, or even considering the other side. There does seem to be a very polarized trend going on, where people are seeing the other side as, members of a cult. It's on both sides. That's what I find really interesting. Both sides are saying the same thing about each other. They're members of a cult. They don't listen. They're, they just follow blindly. And so if if we could change the conversation so it's more about our own interests, and talk about what is it that you find lacking in the system? What would you like to see more of? What would you like to see less of? Rather than, are you right? Are you wrong? I think it makes it very difficult to have a conversation that will go anywhere if you're focused on who's right and who's wrong. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts, Eryn?
No, I agree. This conversation has been helpful for me personally to just reevaluate, where am I putting my time into these conversations, and where am I not, and why, and where do I want to engage more. And I hope that that's the case for our listeners as well, because there will be a level of discomfort wherever you go, wherever you engage, because it might be something a little bit different, or a little bit new, a little bit more challenging, or maybe it will be something completely familiar, just done maybe a little bit of a different way. But I think being able to show up as your authentic self in those spaces, and when I say authenticity, that's our higher self. That's not our being a troll on the internet, right? Like, that's not authentic. That's not who we're supposed to be. And I think that that's one of the challenges people struggle with, is they don't want to speak anything in public or aloud, because they're afraid then that'll get a soundbite will get taken out of context. And that happens. And I just want to say we have to be gentler with people and give them grace in some capacities, because a soundbite is something, it's not the whole picture, right? And it leads to a lot of assumptions and things like that. So just making sure that we can hold each other and ourselves with as much care through this process as possible. And that's, if you show up with care anywhere you go, whether that's your profession, your family, for yourself, it'll be okay, right? Like, if there's a level of care brought to the situation, I think that that's something that I guess could be helpful. So I don't know. I guess maybe I'm circling in on a coaching nugget of wisdom here, and I would just say to try something different that you think will be healing and helpful for not only yourself, but for other people. What does that look like? We'd love to hear back on what you do or what you say.
Yeah, that would be great to hear how that goes. And I would have the same kind of coaching nugget of wisdom as a question or an invitation to have that conversation with someone that you trust, someone that you feel comfortable being your authentic self with, having that conversation. And maybe even together, going back to what you said, Eryn, about the commentator saying it in the darkness, finding help, finding support. But maybe you could explore that other side together with someone that is someone you trust, someone that cares about you and would be willing to look at the other side together and find a way to build a bridge and find some commonalities there.
Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm L Shawn with Mayshell Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.